Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers. I'm your host SM Hali with another edition of Defense and Diplomacy. 72 years ago, the Muslims of the Indian subcontinent decided to form the state of Pakistan. And on 23rd March 1940 at Lahore, the Pakistan resolution was passed. This provided them with a framework on which to work so that the Muslims could carve for themselves a separate state, because the departure of the British would only mean a change of masters if they had continued under Indian subjugation of the Hindus. To discuss the implementation of the Pakistan resolution and also where Pakistan stands today, we are honored to have in our studio today a senior analyst, Lieutenant General Talat Masood, who is not only an octogenarian but has seen the advent of Pakistan. Welcome, sir. We have with us renowned analyst, advocate Tariq Pirzada. Sir, please give us an eyewitness account of what you have seen.
Well, as you know, I'm older than Pakistan, so I can say with a bit of a confidence that the way that Pakistan was created and the way that Pakistan was visualized by these great leaders that you talked about, in which this resolution was passed, shows their sense of imagination and sense of determination.
Their vision.
Their vision, their determination to create that state, which would have been thought that it was a fantasy at that point of time. But they realized that the way that the Muslims were being treated in India, and after the British would have left their plight, especially in those areas where they had the majority.
But permit me, sir, the Quaid-e-Azam was an advent supporter of the Indian Congress. What made him change his mind?
Well, as you very rightly point out, the fact that Jinnah was one of the most ardent supporters of Congress at one time, but was so disillusioned by the way that the Congress started behaving and conducting itself, it became essentially a Hindu majority party. And its thinking was so prejudiced that it became impossible for Jinnah to think that he can associate himself with Congress and then see India becoming independent. So in a very brilliant way, one of the most brilliant lawyers, I think, he created history by creating a country. There is not a single country which has been created the way that Pakistan has been. For that, I think we can be proud, although that is different, that we have not lived up to the expectations.
We'll just come back to it. Advocate Tariq Pirzada, you are yourself an advocate, and so was Muhammad Ali Jinnah, a barrister of high repute. And the General just pointed out that it was not only his determination but his prescience which helped create Pakistan, carve a separate homeland for us. What is your opinion, sir?
You know, the great thing about the founder of the nation, the great Quaid, is that he was able to appreciate the magnitude of the problems of the time confronting the Muslim community of India and the subcontinent. And he had a vision how the Muslim world was living at that time, what were they going through. So somebody had to come up with the solutions. As General Saab pointed out, and you pointed out, he was an ardent supporter of Congress. He worked with the Congress year after year, decade after decade. And then a conclusion was drawn that maybe the fates of the two nations were not intertwined. And at that time, on 23rd of March, they announced the vision for the creation of a separate state. States are normally not created. They are normally a result of the evolution of history. We were the only state of that time. As the late President Sadat of Egypt had pointed out at one time, that it was the emergence of Pakistan that led to the freedom movements and gave a guiding light to the rest of the Muslim world. And most of the Muslim world became free after the creation of Pakistan. So that's the kind of credit I do want to give to the great Quaid.
Point well taken, sir. So you saw the birth pangs which Pakistan had to face, and we did have our share of difficulties. How do you visualize that, sir, and how did we tackle those initial problems, sir?
Actually, Pakistan from the very start faced colossal problems, gigantic nature, in the sense, and this is no exaggeration in fact, because it was a country which was created, but there were no institutional strength provided to it, because the areas which came to Pakistan, the provinces, obviously they were firstly relatively much more backward in comparison to the rest of the provinces, because they were on the fringes. They had not been given the due attention by the British in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of infrastructure. So all that had to be created. Even Balochistan was not even a province at that time. So you can imagine that how neglected these areas were. So was Fata, so was the then province of Frontier. So I think we have the only relatively more advanced province was that of Punjab, and that too was politically in a way not so much in favor of Pakistan. So there were, and then the political institutions were not there. I think the most important thing we have to remember is that when Pakistan came into being, there were millions of refugees which also came to Pakistan. Then there was a lot of bloodshed. And when these people who had to migrate, millions of them, to Pakistan from East Punjab, from other parts of India, those had to be protected by the military. So the role of the military became important from the first day in that sense. They were protecting the trains. They were also responsible to a large extent of creating refugee camps. And then, of course, the Kashmir War started in 1948, so they also got involved in that. So the role of the army from the very beginning became very significant. And sometimes people keep on saying that the army has had a very predominant role in governing the state, but they forget.
Unfortunately, Pakistan has been governed for 2/3 of its time by military dictators, which, of course, hopefully is now behind us. But how do you see this dichotomy, sir?
This dichotomy is also because of the role that I just mentioned, continued to sort of be very significant. Then what had happened was that whereas the Congress was a very strong political party, the Muslim League was mostly a movement. And it is because of Quaid-e-Azam and his personality, his vision and his integrity and character, which really made the Muslims of India follow him and then create Pakistan. But the Muslim League did not have its roots and did not have a political structure in any of the provinces truly in the way that it could be called strong political party, with the result that you had a military which was very strong, you had a political parties which were very weak, and that is why you found that, and then you had a problem of East and West Pakistan in the sense that the constitution was also not made. So you did not have, whereas we were supposed to be a democratic country, but we did not have elections. We had a lot of intrigues, we had a lot of change of governments. Pakistan remained very unstable and chaotic. Now people keep on talking and saying that Pakistan today, for instance, we have come a long way, in comparison to what Pakistan was.
If you hold that thought, so I'll just come back to it. He mentioned about the constitution, and constitutionally we have had a lot of problems. We did not have a constitution till 1956, and that too got abrogated in 1958 by Ayub Khan. And then ultimately it was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto who, with the consensus of the various political parties, gave us a constitution in 1973. So how was this resolved?
Let me point out one thing about the Constitution of 1956. I think of all the, if the creation of Pakistan was a miracle, if I can call it that way, then I tell you, despite all the infighting of the political parties and tussles that had been going on between 1947 and 1956, it was a great achievement in itself that finally a document, that is the Constitution of 1956, had been agreed to, and it was for the first time, there is hardly an example in modern history that a majority of a country agreed to the rule of parity in a constitutional way. And that was an amazing thing. The people of East Pakistan, despite their majority, agreed to have 50% share in the government and in the state. This is unbelievable. The credit goes to them. The shame is this, that constitution was not respected. That is, otherwise Pakistan would have been on a great path to success after 1956. And actually the election was only a few months away when the martial law was imposed. He didn't have to do that. I'm sorry, Ayub Khan really hurt the country. If we can call any other dictator any name, Ayub Khan was one of them. But right now we are in a situation, let me just get to the quickly to this point, where the judicial power of the state is asserting itself, where the executive power of the state is asserting itself. The institutions are democratically in existence at the present time. They need a continuation for some time. The next elections are not too far. We can have a good democratic start, but this is interlinked with one very fundamental condition, that somebody has to deliver on the economic front in the country. Because if the system, remember, if the system cannot deliver, the people get frustrated with the system. Nobody has the vision to look beyond that.
Right. So, General Talat Masood, coming back to you, the point you were trying to make, the problem, sir, is this, that the detractors of Pakistan are condemning Pakistan and calling us a failed state or a failing state. But what is your opinion? I'm sure you do not agree with this.
No, I don't agree with it. In fact, actually, Pakistan has shown extraordinary resilience in the sense that apart from the internal situation, which of course was affected because of the conditions that prevailed after partition and continue to prevail for a long time despite that, and more so what people forget is that we have been subjected because of our geostrategic position to a lot of external pressures, in the sense that we became victims. We had to participate in the Cold War. The circumstances compelled us to be a part of the Western world, because India's threat was so dominant in Pakistan's psyche, that it had to find an alliance with the West. And because
and on the other hand, India was trying to ally itself with the Soviet Union.
So we became a part of the United States and CENTO, CETO, and then later on, because I want to move forward, with the Afghan Jihad. And so when the Afghan Jihad came, the social structure of the tribal belt was destroyed, and there was so much of turbulence in Afghanistan. So there was a huge fallout of that, which still we are feeling it. And then the events of 9/11. So I think, considering all that, Pakistan, to me, despite our weaknesses and failings, we have come a long way. And look at this point of time, which was very well spoken of by my colleague here, who said that we are making a transition for the first time in history, in the sense from one democratic government to another democratic dispensation, hopefully, after the elections. So I think it's a fantastic achievement in that sense, that Pakistan today, despite military rule for half the time, and the external pressures and the internal situation, is moving in that direction. Then it's not only just that. Pakistan today is has one of the most vibrant media. It has a judiciary which is asserting itself, and which has an executive which is also now calling the shots. Although there are a lot of weaknesses, we still need greater performance, better performance, far better performance than what there is. We also need that these institutions should also see as to what extent they can stretch their boundaries, because sometimes they are stepping on the boundaries of other institutions. So that, I think, adjustment is already taking place. So I think we also have to understand that the 18th Amendment, the 19th Amendment, the 20th was taking place by consensus. Then I think we also have to understand that the NFC award was also made by this government. So I want to say that whereas there are weaknesses, the economy, as was pointed out, terrorism, we are facing a huge challenge, but if we are democratic, if we remain democratic, we strengthen institutions, then there is no way that we cannot fight both terrorism and improve our economy, because economy depends a lot on the strength of political institutions as well. Because if the political institutions become strong, then the political leaders will be in a position to bring about economic reforms and taxation and all that, which they are not able to do now at the moment because of the process that we are going through.
Right. Advocate Tariq Pirzada, both of you have enumerated our successes and we have had failures. The 1971 war and resultantly the dissection of Pakistan and the formation of Bangladesh is a major failure. In fact, it prompted Indira Gandhi, who was the perpetrator of that war, to claim that she had sunk Jinnah's two-nation theory in the Bay of Bengal.
And taken the revenge of 1,000 years of history.
How do you look at it?
Well, as I mentioned, what started with the 1956 Constitution and its abrogation by Ayub Khan had to result in some major disaster. So that was 1971. But let's move on. Since 1971, Pakistan has learned some lessons, but there has been one constant problem. People mostly remember three wars: 1948, 1965, and 1971. But remember, the first Afghan war, the war against Russians in Afghanistan, apparently it was a war for Afghan war, but it was a Pakistani war also. Pakistan remained embroiled in this war for a long time. So that was the fourth war. This is the fifth war that we are fighting for the last 10 years.
In fact, just to remind our viewers, sir, during this Afghan war you are mentioning, I was serving in the Pakistan Air Force then, and for those 10 long years, we were fully embroiled in that because the Pakistan Air Force bore the brunt of it. We were always on air defense alert, we were watchful, and we were trying to catch the intruders, the Soviet intruders and Afghan intruders who would come in and bombard Pakistan.
So regardless of why did we participate, the fact remains, so the fourth Afghan war was the war against Russia and Pakistan's war. And the fifth is what is still going on. This is the 11th year of that war, or rather the 12th year. So Pakistan's problems are huge, but this nation, let me mention one interesting thing. I have very serious disagreements with US foreign policy, but I do want to give credit to one observation. Ambassador Munter was in Harvard University while he was vacationing in the United States, and he made a point before the gathering. He said, let me tell you one thing, that Pakistan is not doomed, and the people of Pakistan have a great deal of resilience, as I have seen. So I'm not quoting him exactly, but this was the gist of what he said. So yes, people of Pakistan are taking a heavy brunt. Our economy needs to be substantially improved. And at the same time, our political institutions have to, come to a level of maturity. These are the three things that we have to, immediately come to grips with. And we don't have a lot of time for that.
Right. As a final point, sir, let's briefly examine the foreign policy. Iran was the first country to recognize Pakistan, and obviously we established diplomatic relations with them. But overall, how do you view our diplomatic relations, our foreign policy in the past 65 years?
I think in the past we primarily had a very good relationship with the Western world, with the Muslim countries, and developed excellent relations with China. Perhaps we were one of the very few countries in the world which were successful in having a very good relationship with China, at the same time having an excellent relationship with the US, which is an extraordinary achievement in that sense, because China was not in the good books, and we were also responsible in a way for opening the window of US to China. For that matter, I think we can take credit for that. Yes, we have had bad relations with India for several, even up till now, but I think a change is coming. So I think even now we are realizing that it is important that in view of the changed circumstances, we should have good relations with India, and because it will help in our economy. So there is a phase in which we are also trying to develop a good relationship with India, which will then help in hopefully solving the major problems that have bedeviled our relationship, and especially that of Kashmir. I would also like to say that we are also trying to build a relationship with Iran, and also trying to play a very positive role in Afghanistan by trying to see as to how best. But that would very much depend on how the end game takes place in Afghanistan.
Right. So, Mr. Tariq Pirzada, talking about foreign policy, the realization has come in Pakistan, and especially with the current leadership, that we need to look at our neighbors for greater support. And that is why of course, China, we have had a wonderful relationship, and as the General just pointed out, it's based on a solid edifice. But we are trying to reach out to Russia, we are trying to have better relations with India, of course, and more importantly, with the Central Asian states. How good a state this will hold us into?
This is a logical strategy. This is a realistic strategy. It is a strategy that will help Pakistan. I always say, and I've said that many times before, crossing Himalayas is easier than crossing Atlantic. And by that I mean our strongest foreign policy point lies in having very deep-rooted relationship with Beijing. If we somehow miss this boat, remember, the relationship cannot just develop based on good whims and wishes. It has to have both a strategic dimension and a very solid economic dimension to it. And on the economic dimension, we are not there with China where we ought to be. So the relationship could suffer in the years ahead if we do not make up for this, lack now. Number one. Number two, as far as India is concerned, we have major problems. And I was very happy to see that one of the recommendations, while I do have difference of opinions and very different
if
thoughts.
You could wind it up,
yeah,
sir.
yeah. On these recommendations that have come out of the parliament. But there was one solid thing, that the core interest of Pakistan was very much protected by making a strong reference to the issue of Kashmir in those recommendations.
Right. So viewers, with that we come to the end of this program, and 25 minutes are not enough to discuss an advent of 6.5 decades. But the important thing is that Pakistan was born in a period of adversity. It has had its fair share of calamities, both natural and man-made. It has had its share of wars as well as vicissitudes and calamities. But the important thing is that the nation of Pakistan is resilient. Its leadership is keen upon pulling us out of the morass that we face as far as economy is concerned, as far as the war against terror is concerned, as far as the energy shortages are concerned. But our brilliant panelists, Lieutenant General Talat Masood, I'm thankful to you, and Advocate Tariq Pirzada, much obliged for your cogent comments, have pointed out that Pakistan is on the path of mend and the future is bright for us. So let us pray and resolve that we will make Pakistan the great nation as envisaged by our founding fathers. Allah Hafiz.